liminal space is about creating behavior. So it's about leadership and followership, but it's too hard to say leadership and followership every single time. And then people still have this mental schema that followership is less than leadership. So if I just say liminal leaders, then people kind of get it. But when we talk about liminal leaders, we're talking about somebody who's stuck in between leading and following. They have to do both simultaneously. So a liminal leader is somebody who is almost every middle manager, every school principal, name it, even presidents, vice presidents, they have to lead and follow at the same time.
Hello, and welcome to episode 189 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and also help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Dr. Chris Fuzie is the owner of CMF Leadership Consulting and is currently the business HR manager for a district attorney's office in California. Chris is a leaderologist too and vice president of the National Leaderology Association, who holds a Doctor of Education, a Master's of Arts, and a Bachelor's of Arts in Organizational Leadership, and has a graduate certificate in human resources and criminal justice education. Chris is a developer, trainer, and consultant for leadership of public, private, profit, and nonprofit organizations since 2010. Chris is the author of 3 books: Because Why, Understanding Behavior and Exigencies, SCORE, Performance Counseling, Save the Relationship, Change the Behavior, and his latest book, Liminal Space, Reshaping Leadership and Followership. Chris is honorably retired from the Modesto Police Department after 28 years of public service, including leading a variety of teams. All right, Dr. Chris Fuzie, welcome to the show today. We're so glad to have you on.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I'm looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to this. It strikes close to home.
All right. Well, we're going to talk all about the work you do with leadership.
Okay.
So let's start with your start. Tell us a little bit about your journey to now being an author and leadership consultant.
So, I never thought I would be here.
Yeah.
I started out in life my goal was to get in the Navy and just be gone, right? That was my first goal. And then that didn't work out. So I joined the police department here in Modesto and ended up 28 years here in Modesto at the police department. But that's where this leadership stuff started. About halfway through, I'd been working about 18 years. And about halfway through, that was about, that point, one of my lieutenants, we're doing a briefing and I'm sitting in the back because I'm one of the old guys, and I'm sitting in the back. And I like to say at that time, I only had a PhD, public high school diploma.
Okay.
And, so he's talking about, he says, hey, any of you who want to promote, and he knew that I wanted to promote, and he kind of turns to the side and looks around somebody else so he can see me. And he says, you need to start thinking about your education. And it was like he shot a bullet and hit me right in the back of the head, and it just kept going around. And I said, okay, I need to think about my education. So I went back to school. Like I said, I only had the public high school diploma. And
Right.
With that, C's and F's were great grades because they were my initials. So they weren't that great. So I went back to school and I said, I need something in case some of my, a lot of my friends have been getting hurt around that time. And, we were a pretty go-getter kind of group. And so I said, if I get hurt, if I can't work anymore as a cop, then what am I going to do? So I went back to school for org leadership. And I said, well, I'll be able to use that anywhere. So I started seeing all of the things that happened in the leadership studies and all the different theories and stuff. I went back to school, finished that, got the BA, went right into the master's program. And in the master's program, started seeing even more of it. And so in that time, I also promoted to a sergeant. So I started using all this stuff. We talk about something in the night class, and I go to work the next day and immediately implement it and see what it did. I remember one night we had this big old pursuit after a gang fight, or because of a gang fight, and people were going to meet at a certain place and then go into this fight together, right? So, round up the troops and then let's posse up and go in. And so they were all rolling code 3 to this one location. That's against policy. We're not doing that. So the next day I started talking about
what is the code 3 for everyone?
Code 3 is lights and siren, rolling code as fast as you can get there. And which is against policy unless you're going to the emergency. Well, they're not going to the emergency. They're going to a staging point. And so I canceled the code 3 and everybody was pissed. So, that's what the cops like to do. You roll code 3. That's anyway. So they were upset about that. So the next day I said, well, that was a bunch of groupthink. We're all, and I started talking about groupthink, and they go, oh gosh, Sarge, more of this educated stuff. Why do you keep bringing it? Well, it's absolutely applicable, so I started doing that. And then we started teaching a leadership program for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And the guy that we had teaching it hadn't even been trained. He didn't know what he was doing. And so I ended up taking over that program with a master's degree, taking over the program as the instructor, and then we started training people throughout the state in leadership and followership. And that's how that started. I promoted to lieutenant, kept working with the leadership program, kept practicing all this stuff in the police department. And then in 2010, the city, after the financial crisis, the city said, hey, you people that get paid a lot of money, we'll give you even a little bit of more money if you just go away for a while.
Okay.
So I said, that's it for me. The stars aligned, and I said, okay, I will. But I kept teaching for IACP, and then IACP changed their business model, and I said, no, I'm done. I didn't agree with their business model. They wanted to charge too much for it. And then I started doing it on my own, started teaching leadership practices on my own, and then went back and I said, hey, wait a minute. Here's the same college, the same university is offering a doctorate degree in org leadership. So I said, yep, I got to do that. So that's kind of how I got into this, and been working in the leadership area ever since. And yeah.
What were some early lessons? Like, what was it like, to be on the police force for that amount of time and now being a leader in the police force?
Well, a lot of the stuff I didn't understand. I didn't understand why certain things happen and how they happen. And some for good reasons and some just because of my own ignorance. But then when I started learning about some of these things, I started realizing it was like, oh, yeah, that's why we do this. That's why. But then other things saying, oh, we should have never been doing that,
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah. So a lot of it I found was for positive purposes and reaffirmed some of the things that I did and wanted to do. And then a lot of it was, oh, we should have never been doing that. And I was able to identify specific instances where that showed theories like in-group, out-group, how we socialize people, cohesion, that kind of stuff. So I'm able to use all of that. And then lately with the followership stuff, I think back on the whole time that we're even in the academy, you're either a leader or a follower when you get sent to a call. You're either the primary or the backup, or a cover officer, some people call them. So if you're the primary, you're in the lead. You decide stuff, you make the decision. And the backup, they have their specific jobs that they're supposed to do, keep you safe, watch the background, and all that kind of stuff. And so, I realized later on, after leaving the police department, we were actually practicing leader, follower, and transitioning during that time. And that we were taught that in the academy. And we never thought about it in those terms. But now I look back and that's what it was. That's what was happening. And you would get dispatched to a call and so would be the primary, and then you're the backup, or you're the 1011. They call it 1011. So you're the 1011. So you knew what your role was. So immediately you know what your role is, you know what you're supposed to be doing. And then if something happens to the primary, or then you end up taking over. Or if it's something like, I know that couple times I get dispatched to, I know a lot of people in Modesto, so I get dispatched to, something that I know the people, and I would say, hey, I shouldn't be primary on this, and can somebody else take? And then I would go there and say, hey, this is a friend of mine. They're going to handle it. You and I have a relationship, so I'm going to stay out of it, but I'm going to make sure everybody's safe, kind of thing. And so you do change the roles, and I never really got that until way after leaving the police department and focusing on followership. Yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think that happens often when people are in roles like you were in, and then now you get moved into leadership, and you kind of see things like you're describing, like, oh, I didn't realize that why that was done that way, or this isn't a good way to do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she said something about rereading something. And now she's looking at it from the followership point of view, and she reread it. And I thanked her for rereading it with new eyes. And I think that's how that occurs, is that, and she said, well, I think in circles. I go, well, I'm glad, because we never would have had this conversation if you hadn't. And so, we tend to go back and look at our circumstances every day. Every day we learn something new or get a new perspective or a new promotion with new eyes. And it's kind of fun to see that.
Yeah. So Chris, this conversation is really, we're going to be talking about leadership probably the whole time.
Yeah.
What would you say is your definition of a great leader?
So in my book, we talk, I can't say one thing or another, because
I know it's a big question.
Right. So I have to refer back to the 86 behaviors that are in my book, because that's how I came upon those. I would ask all of my classes, hey, give me 2 traits or behaviors of great leaders. And so we get, every class, and I would keep track of what they told me. And then we would go back and say, okay, are these things you also want in your followers, right? And everybody goes, yeah, absolutely. So, but I would, to boil it down, the leader needs to be who they need to be to deal with the situation at hand. And I kind of say that you have to be a chameleon, because you have to match the situation. And a chameleon, they match the background and the flora and fauna and everything there, and they can change colors and all that. But and really, I think that's what a great leader does. A great leader looks at what's going on in the situation. Who are my followers? What does the situation entail? Who can I get? What is the goal? All of those factors come into play. So I think to be a great leader, you have to be flexible. You have to be thoughtful, and I could go through and read all 86 behaviors, but those are going to change depending on the situation. And what's funny is that I've asked over and over again for people, so what does it mean to be a great leader? And they give me these traits. And then I was able to boil them down to those 86 behaviors. Those are the ones that kept coming up over and over and over again. Sent out surveys. Hey, are these, what do you want? And what I find interesting is that some of the behaviors that I thought would be ones that people want, not so much. People don't want you. You don't have to be decisive all the time. You don't have to, be charismatic. You don't have to, all these things that you would traditionally think they want.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I did notice that in reading your book. I was looking at the list, and charismatic was down in the bottom, like, where you had things that 95% of the people were saying, Only
Right.
50% said. And, we talk a lot about introversion on this show, and typically that's not a gift of introverts. Definitely introverts can be passionate and can be great leaders, but charismatic often isn't a thing. And sometimes it seems like just society is saying a great leader has to be charismatic. And so it was interesting to see that down just in the 50%, you
Yeah.
know. So it definitely helps bust a myth for me. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's true. We do have, there's a lot of people think, we still have like my generation and some of the ones before us that are still around who still have the World War II great man theory kind of
Yeah.
idea in their head, and that you have to be the one that stands up. We all want a hero, and that's kind of how we are in the United States. We all want a John Wayne. We all want a Captain America. We all want, but realistically, that's not what a good leader is. A good leader is a lot of times working behind the scenes, talking to people that make stuff happen that you never see, you know. And so I think a lot of these traits are holdover traits. I don't know how else to say that, that generationally we still have that in part of our culture. And so I think that's going to go away. I talk about leadership and followership changing a lot, or transforming or evolving. And I think that's part of what's going to happen here is that when you look at the focus now shifting towards followership and the behaviors, and there's a lot of people starting to do research on the behaviors and the similar behaviors or shared behaviors of leaders and followers. And so they're starting to identify, just like what I did, they're starting to, but they're doing it even more so, looking at these behaviors. And I think what we're going to find is that the behaviors that are more pluralistic, the behaviors that are more not soft or but like, sorry, I'm thinking about this out loud, is that the behaviors that are like emotional intelligence, being empathetic, you know, that's really what it's about. I mean, you don't walk into a room and say, "I'm Captain America. You're going to be calm." You don't do that, right?
Yeah, and we don't want that.
No,
That's the thing. Most
right,
people don't want that kind of leadership.
right.
Um, again, there's 86. Just what were some of the ones that came to the top?
Well, some of the ones on the top, I'm going to look at them because I don't
Yeah,
memorize
no,
all
that's
of these
fine.
things.
That's fine.
Ones people wanted 100%. Now, remember, this is both leaders and followers, not just
Right.
leaders. So both leaders and followers, they said accountable, committed, competent. You think about competent, like I had this discussion with one of my cops one day. He says, the chief of police doesn't even know how to write a ticket. I go, I don't care if he knows how to write a ticket or not. I do care if he knows how to get our budget right, or how to work with city council to get the right cars or more people or something like that. So competent could be, that's one of those that it's situational also.
Just on
Conscientious.
that though, it's really interesting because it's it's really it's really those things that we don't do very often that we're not going to know how to do. So
Right.
to expect the chief of police to be able to write a ticket when he's never doing that is very unrealistic
Right.
because we don't have the repetition of doing a certain thing. So,
Right.
and that's a good example of things come up with people expect, well, they should be able to do this thing that I'm doing, but that's probably not a realistic expectation.
Right. Right. And what does their job loop entail, right?
Right.
And could that officer go have a conversation with the mayor and the city council about grant funding? You know,
Right.
yeah. So it's really interesting that way because a lot of people don't think about it. They just think the boss should be able to do everything. Well, not
Right. That's
necessarily.
yes, very
Yeah.
unrealistic.
Yeah. Couple of the other ones mentioned: emotional intelligence, ethical, good listener, help others succeed, honest, intelligent, lead by example, perspective, problem solving, purpose. So that kind of goes along with the book Drive, where it's a purpose. Trying to remember what it is. autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the three things that Daniel Pink talks about there. Respect, self-motivated, shared success, and teachable, which I think is interesting that comes up in the 100%, is that somebody who's teachable, they don't know everything. Your bosses, they're not going to know everything. As long as somebody is teachable, you can move people forward. And for me, that's a big factor when it comes to any kind of leadership, is how do you get your people to do that for you?
Yeah. So, Chris, you've written 3 books. We're definitely I've been enjoying your latest one, Liminal Space, but tell us about the 3 books.
So I tend to say I wrote these books backwards, because the first one, called Because Why, Understanding Behavior and Exigencies, this was a direct result of what was happening right after I retired from police work, and then what was happening in like Ferguson, Missouri, and all that kind of stuff. And it applies now also. But how do we evaluate the behavior of people who have to act, who feel compelled to act, or who have to act in order to save themselves or other people? So the guy who landed, Captain Sully, I forget his real name, Sully, who landed the plane on the Hudson River, he knew what he could do. He had to break the rules and disobey what he was told in order to save people's lives. We have to think about that. What are the things that are going on in their mind? How does time affect that? How does the knowledge that they have, how the information that they have, the situation itself, does that have some kind of inherent something that people will? I'm deathly afraid of fire, but I've gone into burning buildings to try and see if there's anybody in that building. And that's kind of hard to do. How do you get people to do that? And then how do you evaluate that behavior after the fact? So that book is all about evaluating behavior and looking at it after the fact. You have to, and how you do it. And with that one, I have the exigent response model that I built for that. And it talks about how you go from one to the other. And you're trying to get from a chaotic, crazy event to something that's normal or semi-normal, at least, doable. And then you look at the standards of what we've tried to do, the training, the education, the practicing, et cetera. And that's at the bottom. And then you look at the top, is that you have to sometimes just make stuff up. You have to, and there's one part in there where I'm going to look at it, the informative failure. And the informative failure is what says, this isn't working. I've tried all the things I'm supposed to try. This isn't working. I got to do something different. And that's where people become innovative. That's where people go off script. That's where people start making stuff up, and it saves their lives or saves somebody else's lives, or they do something that you would go, why did they do that? But it saves somebody else's life. People do that, and we have to be able to evaluate it. That's that book. The middle book is Score Performance Counseling. And what that one is how to change behavior through performance counseling. And what I did with that one was specifically a research-based book. I took what the Office of Personnel Management, they do this survey every year. And every year they find basically the same results, is that people don't want to address poor performance. And then when they do address poor performance, they come up with these, there's 7, but I boiled it down to 6 different things. They're not supportive. They're not clear. They're not organized in how they do it. They don't, they don't, trying to think of they don't use the resources, and they don't get each other involved in doing what they're supposed to be doing and coming up with a plan. And then they don't follow up. So SCORE is about that. And it goes through a whole method. So I took what their usual failures are, and out of those usual failures, I created SCORE Performance Counseling. And it walks you through how to do a performance counseling without, and it takes away some of the problems with accusing people. Even if you say, hey, you didn't do this right. As soon as you say you and you point at them, now it's an accusatory. Now you have conflict. So we don't do that. Take that away. Speak in I, me, my statements. Take the behavior away from the person and put it somewhere. Even if I make a motion of grabbing it, even imaginary, grab it and put it on the table. And every time I talk about that behavior, I point to the behavior and I look at the behavior. What that sends the message to people subconsciously is it's not about me, it's about that. And so it makes it so much easier for people to do performance counseling and change behavior. That's why it's SCORE performance counseling, change the behavior and save the relationship. Because we want to save that relationship. Most people do performance counseling, they screw up the relationship because they do it wrong. And just witnessed that about 2 weeks ago here.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah. Even though I told him how they, okay, just go in, say this, that, and he allowed a bunch of other stuff, and it didn't work out well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then liminal space is about creating behavior. So that's why I say I did them backwards. You usually create it, change it, and then evaluate it, but it is what it is.
All right. Well, tell us about it. Like I said, I've been enjoying this book. Tell us about what is liminal leadership.
So it's about leadership and followership, but it's too hard to say leadership and followership every single time. And then people still have this mental schema that followership is less than leadership. So if I just say liminal leaders, then people kind of get it. But when we talk about liminal leaders, we're talking about somebody who's stuck in between leading and following. They have to do both simultaneously. So a liminal leader is somebody who is like almost every middle manager, every school principal. I mean, name it. Even presidents, vice presidents, they have to lead and follow at the same time. So, for instance, I work at a district attorney's office, and here in the district attorney's office, I'm number 3 in rank, I guess. It's the DA, the ADA, and then me. And then we have 160 other people in this office. So we have an elected official, and he says, this is the way I'm going to do things. This is what I want to do. I mean, it's law, policy, ethical, and that kind of stuff. And so he tells us this is what I'm going to do. And well, now I have to not only follow what he's telling me, but lead the other 160 people in that direction. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about liminal space, is that you're in that space where you have to lead and follow at the same time. And you don't just lead and you don't just follow, and you're not switching back and forth each time. You're doing the same behavior. So again, we go back to this list of 86 behaviors. Is it possible to be courageous as a leader and as a follower at the same time? Yes. Is it possible to be proactive as a leader and a follower at the same time? Yes. So these are behaviors that everybody wants in their leaders and followers. And so when we're in this liminal space where we're having to lead and follow simultaneously, that's where the behavior starts to become more important than the role or position. So that's kind of what I mean by liminal leaders.
Yeah. So like you said, most people that are in leadership roles are also followers in some way. Why is it so important to understand that? What happens if someone doesn't understand that?
Well, then they're going to lean on the role, the positional power, or they're not going to do something that they should be doing. So let's say they focus on being the leader, right? And somebody gives them direction. They go, no, that's messed up. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. They may be going off track and not being a good follower because they're not following what the person, I guess the authority above them or the other person with authority tells them they want done. Now they're not being a good follower. And then if they direct other people in a leadership role, they direct other people to do something different. Now you're screwing up the whole process, and you're not really supporting that leader, which the follower should be doing. So it does create this. I mean, if you focus on the position it creates this power imbalance. And whereas if you meld the two together and you focus on the behavior, then the power goes away and you're getting more of the behavior as the focus.
Yeah. And as I was reading, one of my big takeaways was this like kind of collaborative mindset that, you're
Yeah.
working on a goal, but you do take both roles. So
Yes.
how does someone that doesn't have that isn't really looking at themselves as a follower, although they are, how do they develop that collaborative mindset?
So first they have to understand their follower type, their follower, how they are as a follower, their role as a follower. Without that, you're not going to get there. So what I would suggest is Bruce Kelly came up with the follower. There's a survey, and you can take a survey and see what kind of follower style you have. And so, find out what kind of follower you are first, and then say, okay, how does this fit with what my leader wants me to do? What kind of follower am I? Because if you find that you're a passive follower, or even an alienated follower or something, you're going to have a harder time changing to being a good follower. You can be a great leader and a terrible follower. You're not going to get much done. And your followers are going to recognize, hey, wait a minute. This is where the walk the talk kind of thing comes in. If you say, do as I say, not as I do, and you just go do whatever you want, and you expect everybody to do something else, then it's not going to work. So you have to understand your followership style first. Then look at your leadership style. Are you a person who's a power-based person? Reward and punishment, expert power, referent power, that kind of, what is your power base? And so, you want people to be a referent leader and do things because they want people to respect them, and they want to do things out of respect and have respect for you. Well, if you're not doing that, you're going to have a hard time putting those two together, because you have to understand that you are a certain type of leader, how you use connection power, how you use information power, all of that's going to be important. So to have this collaborative style, you have to understand all of that, plus the goal. So again, what behaviors are you going to need to meet all of these problems? So if you understand the goal, what the goal is, you understand your type of power base, where you lead from and where you follow from, that's going to make it easier for you to be a collaborative person, at least knowing yourself better and avoiding your own pitfalls that you're going to experience.
Yeah. And also really was getting out of your book that it's about what behaviors need to happen, to get to that goal. And
Right.
you talk about tessellations. Tell us what that is.
Oh my God. Okay. So now we're talking, about math.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a tessellation it's actually a very simple concept. A tessellation is nothing more than, in mathematics anyway, it's a pattern of shapes that fit together, and they fit together perfectly with no gaps or overlaps. Okay. So in nature, you have tessellations. In art, you have tessellations. In architecture, you have tessellations. Think about a honeycomb, right? That's the easiest one to think about. You have all these hexagons together. I mean, are they perfect? Maybe not. But all these hexagons together, they fit, and they're so strong together. That's what creates the strength of that beehive, is you have this tessellation. So you can do it with squares and triangles. Squares, equilateral triangles, and hexagons are regular polygons. And what they do is they fit together without you can fit them together without any kind of overlap. Those are regular polygons. Then you can have an irregular tessellation, which is like a different shape. If you look at some of the artworks, where you have first it shows birds flying, and then they kind of morph into, now it becomes a building or something like that. You see, those are irregular tessellations. You're creating the same pattern over and over again that covers the surface of the plane. So in the book, we talk about tessellations as in tessellations of behaviors. Imagine if you could apply the same idea of, if you want, pick any three behaviors. If you want everyone to be teachable, or you want everyone to be resilient, or everyone to be inspiring, you can teach. Once you know what the behavior is that you want, you can identify it, you can define it. If you can define it, you can teach it. If you can teach it, you can observe it. And if you can observe it, you can evaluate it. And so for any manager, any supervisor who's had to do evaluations, and you say, okay, this person is professional, what does that mean? Right? But if you say not only are they teachable, but they're, I forget the ones I use, resilient. Yeah, right? Now you've defined behaviors that you can actually say, yes, this person learned how to do this behavior. It's just like teaching somebody how to make a widget. If I can teach them how to make a widget and they become the best widget maker, right? Okay, what does it mean to be a good widget maker? You explain the process. What does it mean to be, in this other position? If you can teach these behaviors, and then you spread those behaviors out throughout your entire organization, everybody knows what to expect.
So the idea is you come up with these core behaviors that everybody can understand, and you can articulate them. And
Correct.
Is that the idea?
Yes, that's absolutely the idea. So most organizations, the top of the organization is the strategic part. And then in the middle of the organization, you have the tactical. And then in the bottom of the organization, and I say bottom, but it doesn't have to be the bottom. The front line, you have the operations part. Well, for the triangle, which is a good tessellation, the triangle is one of the strongest shapes there is, just because of the way it's formed. So the triangle has three sides, three behaviors. These are your three strategic behaviors that you want everyone to be able to do. Right. And ideally that would come from the 100% group. So ethical, competent, and accountable. Let's just use those. Then the four in the tactical area. So now you know that's what your upper manager, your C-suite is being held to, those three behaviors. Then your middle managers, let's say empathetic, flexible, open-minded, and proactive. So we use those four for those people that are the middle managers. Okay, these are the things we're looking for. This is how we're going to get stuff done and pass it on to our operations section. And then in the operations section, you use the hexagon. So now you're using the three, and that's why I use those three shapes, 3 core, 4 core, and 6 core. If you want to do 2 or 4 at the top, and you want to, whatever you choose to do, but instead of trying to, how many mission statements have you memorized, right? Instead of trying to,
right.
right. Yeah. Okay, so here's the mission statement, the value statement, the goal statement, and then, you memorize all that. Well, what does that mean to my job? No, I'm a key punch operator. What does that mean to my job? I don't know. But if I say I want you to be teachable and come up with these other things, and then they understand what specific behaviors they have to do. So that's kind of why that structure is, because most organizations are structured that way.
Yeah. So tell us about this project you're also working on, Leaderology. What is that?
Okay. Well, that when I first heard this term Leaderology, I went, oh, that's funny. But you have biology, right? You have psychology. We even have mixology for people who mix drinks. Yeah. So we have all of these ologies, which is just the study of. And so I met with another guy, and we started talking about this, and he had this whole big idea, and he kind of proposed this idea of starting an organization about leaderology. I said, well, tell me more about that. So we start talking about this, and his name is David Robinson, Dr. David Robinson. And he starts telling me about this leaderology stuff. And really, it is kind of fascinating because we are talking about the scientific study of leadership. And so that takes in all sorts of different aspects. But how many colleges and universities have leadership studies and big money leadership studies, right? And bachelor's, master's, and PhD level, EDD level leadership studies. That's leaderology. They're studying leadership. That's leaderology. So we said, hey, wait a minute. We also have all these coaches and people doing coaching who have no idea, who have never studied leadership, never studied the theories of leadership. And they're out coaching people. They're telling people, okay, so let's say I ran a flower shop successfully for 25 years. And now I become a leadership coach. Okay, so I'm going to go to a car dealership and tell them how to run a car dealership based on my flower shop experience. Come on. So, and then I usually find out from these people how they're doing when I'll say, okay, well, how does the theory of cohesion work with this? And they can't answer the question. But so a leaderologist is somebody who has actually studied leadership. So what they're doing in the colleges and universities. And we started the National Leaderology Association based on that, is that we will verify based on their transcripts, their degrees. We'll go through that and we'll verify that this person, yes, has been trained, it does have, has passed these kind of classes, and they do have these degrees that show that they have studied leadership. And so that's what leaderology is about. And we're trying to push that as I don't know. Let me go backwards a little bit. Psychology used to not be its own science. Psychology used to be part of sociology. But in the I think it was 1880s. Okay, you don't quote me on that. In the yeah. So, a bunch of people who are studying psychology as part of sociology, they said, hey, we need to have our own science. It is our own science. It's separate and distinct. And so what we're doing is following their lead. We're saying, hey, we're doing the same thing with leadership. Leadership is not part of everything else. As a matter of fact, you have all these other universities and colleges that have a specific leadership degree. Then we need to have our own science. And that's what leaderology is about. So, and I'm hoping that it helps, like with psychology, you get someone who's, if I have an organizational problem that I need to deal with, I don't want somebody who's, I work with 60 some or 50 some odd lawyers here. I don't want somebody who's just run a flower shop to come in here and try and say, this is what you need to fix some of these problems that you have organizationally. I want somebody who understands the theories of leadership. What happens in socialization? What if you don't socialize someone correctly? What happens if you don't use stickum to get cohesion to work? What happens in team dynamics? Cohesion is part of a group structural dimension and a group process. What if you don't have cohesion? What does that do to your team? So many different aspects that are scientifically proven, that if somebody doesn't understand those, they may misdiagnose and mistreat the organization.
Yeah, I think the comparison to psychology was really helpful for me just now, because it's like, yeah, if you want a psychologist to treat some particular thing, they need to have a certain set of knowledge.
Right.
And so if you need someone as a leadership consultant, they should have a certain set of knowledge, right?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. But right now the field is wide open. There's no regulation. I'm not for a ton of regulations, believe me.
Right.
Having been a cop for a lot of years, I'm done. I'm done with that. And I don't want to be the leader, the leadership enforcer.
Right.
But then the other side of that is, are people getting ripped off? Are people being led down the wrong road? I talked to one consultant, leadership consultant, and her comment was, well, all you have to do is ask the right questions and the client will find their own way. I said, well, what if you ask the right questions, or you ask the questions and the client still starts going off the wrong way? How do you know? And she said, well, really, we don't. It's what the client wants. It's like, no, I'm not going to go to a medical doctor and say, hey, it hurts up here. And then he starts checking my stomach. And I go, no, it's not my stomach. It's up here. And, no, I'm not going to go to that doctor.
Right.
So, right. Or get a second opinion. I mean, the same thing. So, I mean, that's kind of what the leaderology stuff is. And it doesn't sound normal, and probably because it's new. But I think it's going to take off because followership is also part of leaderology, because followership is part of the process of leadership. And so that's what's happening, is people are starting to look at that now. So that's why leaderology is kind of important.
Chris, this has been a wonderful conversation. It went by really fast.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't talked about yet?
I have a new grandbaby.
Hey, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's been the focus for about the last week. So,
yeah,
but
very cool.
Yeah, but there is one other thing that I want to touch on is, and this has to do with being an introvert, is that the idea of leadership is not, it doesn't define us. Being an introvert doesn't define us. Being charismatic doesn't define us. All of those things. So, we tend to put these labels on things and people, and I hate that. We need to stop doing that. We need to start talking about people as people. And when we start talking about behaviors, then we don't focus on, are they a leader? Are they a follower? Are they an introvert or an extrovert or charismatic or whatever? It doesn't matter. Let's talk about the behaviors that we need to do to get things done. And that's kind of where my focus is in the behavior-based leadership studies. Let's do everything based on behavior.
Yeah. And if, with labels like introvert or extrovert, if that's all it's not helpful. And this show is definitely getting behind that. What does it mean? Where are your strengths? What are your needs? And again, like you're saying, how do you get those behaviors done? So,
right. Yeah. And if we can teach the behaviors that we want, every organization is different. And this is kind of an interesting factor, is that when you start looking at all these leadership theories and applying them, they work well for good organizations, and they also work well for bad organizations. It works for gangs. It works for, the mafia. It works for, So, that's why we need to look at the behavior and what the behavior does.
Yeah. All right. Well, where can people find out more about the great work you're doing, Chris?
Well, if they want to look me up online, www.cmfleadership.com. I have that. Score Performance Counseling has its own website. And that's just Score Performance. It's longer than heck, but it's just scoreperformancecounseling.com. You can find it there. You can also find the books on Amazon. They're all on Amazon. So that's where to get a hold of me.
All right. Well, thanks again for this great conversation.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate being here. I hope I didn't talk too much.
It was awesome.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media channels. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code, and you can also have the option of purchasing the full report if you'd like to learn more. I'll add a link to the show notes. So many great things about being an introvert, and we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs, and be strong.